Today, I'm going to talk about regulatory documents. I'm going to talk about assessment checklists. I'm talking about scheduling compliance assessments, reporting, and then how some of this can be used for continuity strategies at your installation. So first and foremost, the AFMAN 32-7002 section 4.6.3.1 does talk about needing to have your operating permits, permit compliance assessments, and decomposition of permit requirements and associated checklists in APIMS. So this is something that the AFMAN requires you to do. One of the things I'll warn you about, I've noticed with a lot of installations, sometimes part of their UEI inspections, they have been getting written up if it's not completed, if it's not up to date. We actually even had an installation get written up because the questions didn't match their most recent permit. And so they are looking at these things when they're doing inspections. So if you have one coming up, it would be a good time to make sure that you've got that squared away. Okay. For regulatory documents, any regulatory document can be maintained in the module. This goes with Title V permit, permit by rule, federal niche apps, approval orders, state regulations even. And then APIMS maintains versioning of permits to track modifications and permit history. So I'm going to kind of do a combination of slides and the application. So to get to the regulatory document area, you click on compliance menu, regulatory document, and then it'll get you to this search screen. Now, the normal way to do this and something that you need to pay attention to is this radio button defaults to just the latest versions. So if I was to hit search, it would only bring up the most recent version of all of my checklists, okay? So in this example, Laughlin has a lot of state regulations in here broken down. Texas, for those of you that are familiar with it, has a concept called permit by rule, where sources that may not be in their Title V permit are permitted by rule. And so they have taken and uploaded all of the permit by rules that apply to sources at their installation. And then they also have their Title V permit. And then you've got your, we've broken down and input the federal niche app Quad I. Now, for those of you that are interested in the niche apps, I do have these all broken down with associated checklists. We did it at an enterprise level, and I can script them into your database. I think I have it for 5 or 6 different niche apps. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to me. I have all of that done. It's not something that you would need to replicate and do on your own, okay? So here's their Title V permit that I wanted to look at, and you can see that there's 3 different versions of this Title V permit. Now, when I talk about versioning, let's just search on no and say latest version no. When you talk about versioning, the way APIMS does this is it allows you to take all of the permit decomp and applicable requirements that have been completed for this version and copy them forward to the next version so that as your permit evolves and changes, it doesn't usually have a wholesale change. It usually just has a couple modifications, some sources removed, some language changed. You can then come into the most recent version and all of this will show up automatically, and then you just have to edit it. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. And then you can also go back and look at previous versions to see how it's changed and what the difference is. And you can use business objects reports to do some of that analysis as well. So as you can see, it's got all the same types of requirements, okay? Any questions about how the versioning works and the importance of it? One common mistake I see is that when people get a new permit, they upload it as a completely new document. When you do that, then you're having to start all over again with breaking it down into the applicable requirements, and you're losing that traceability of what changed from permit to permit. So I highly recommend you use this plus button to create a new version. Okay, and when you do that, it's going to have a pop-up window and just allow you to put in what the start date is for the new permit. Okay. All right. So like I said, this has a lot of combination of federal regulations, state regulations, permit by rules, and Title V. Pretty much any governing document you can put in here. I think for the overseas bases that don't have necessarily permits, the OEBGD and the FGS are broken down so that they can kind of tell what they need to comply with. Okay. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the value of breaking it down. So each permit has different conditions. It may have a table or paragraphs, but the permit conditions can be broken down into succinct requirements. The guidelines that I say for doing this are, if I was to read that requirement, would it make sense on its own? And when you're doing this, sometimes you may need to repeat the table header so that it puts it in context to say these are emission limits for this particular source. They can also be categorized according to whether they're a record keeping requirement, an emission limit, reporting, if they're just a general condition. General conditions would be things like the base cannot emit a particular odor, or they have some sort of general, you can't add new sources without notifying the state, things like that. Whereas like the record keeping is going to be, these are logs that have to be maintained that can be audited. For reporting, this is the semi-annual report that needs to be submitted by this type of date. And so you can break it down so that kind of simplifies and can be used later in reports to know what exactly is needed to be tracked, what needs to be done, and what emission limits you may need to comply with. These checklist or these then applicable requirements can then also be associated to checklist questions, and I'll show you that here in just a minute in APIMS. But when you're doing your inspection checklist, by answering a particular question, it's traceable to which permit requirements that meets. So if I have a question that says, did you obtain all of your materials from ESO-MIS? That could fulfill the permit requirement of the fact that you're tracking the SDS for it, you're making sure that it's approved for that process. And so you can associate those. So if a regulator ever asked, how are you complying with this permit condition, you can show them the association to the inspection checklist, okay? So it's got traceability all the way, but also allows you to have a checklist question that's in more plain language speak that, say, an operator could answer. And they don't necessarily have to have all the legal verbiage that the permit may or may not have. And then you can assign requirements to specific processes or groups of processes. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. That's through a thing called the regulated unit group. Now, this can be really useful in coming up to speed with your programming, knowing like if I have this particular paint booth, what things do I need to make sure that this paint booth is tracking and doing in order to maintain compliance with my permit. And paint booths are kind of one of those things where some paint booths may have more stringent requirements than other paint booths. And so this would be a valuable query to know. And then input limits can also be systematically queried. And so a lot of this breaking down of the data makes it easier for reporting. It may not be something that you go into the reg doc area to look at, but it's very useful when we get to the reporting side of it to give you kind of a one-stop shop for what you need to do and what kind of requirements you need to meet with. Okay, so let's just go into the application real quick. And let's look at the Title V permit for Lackland. And if I'm just going to come down to a particular, oops. Okay, so let's look at this particular one. And if I look and edit view, so you can see that this has got a sort order, so we can make sure our permit is in the right order according to how it displays in the document. The condition number is usually the paragraph number or how it's denoted on the permit. So it makes it easy to compare this and go find it in the actual permit. And then this is the requirement type that we were talking about. And this can be configured to your installation to meet your needs. But the most common ones are things like opacity limit, emission limit, general condition, operating limit, and so on and so forth. And then the next thing is the applicable requirement, and this is just straight out of the permit. And like I said, exhaust opacity for compression non-ignition or ignition non-road engines of this subpart must not exceed 20% during the acceleration mode. Okay, so this is something that they need to meet. Because it is an opacity limit, you can give it an operating limit type of opacity 20%, and this can be queried into a report to say, for this process, I need to make sure that the opacity is not more than 20%. Now, to tie this to a process, you go to the RUGS tab. And from here, you can create groups of sources. So this one applies to 4 different groups of engines. And if I want to see the processes that are tied to this, I can click the view button. Okay. And so these are all of the processes that are group 2 engines. Okay. So they have a specific group that is regulated. And like I said, this is all kind of customizable to your permit. Not all permits are the same. In this particular one, they have their engines grouped out into different compliance groups, but this particular requirement applies to several groups. Okay. Any questions about that so far? So if I was to create an applicable requirement, I could just come here and let's say that it is an operating limit, and then I can put in the requirement. I can save and finish. Once I do that, it's going to give me the limit tab. From the limit tab, I wanted to show you that it can change. This limit, operating limit type will change based on the requirement type. Okay, so if it's an operating limit, it's going to give me a different drop down here than it would be if it was, let's say, oops, a material usage limit. In that case, I can then choose a specific material from my material product. Okay, so the requirement type will affect how the limit tab appears and what's available on the limit tab. Okay, any questions about that? Now, for the rugs, this is going to give you a list of all of the rugs that have been created already. You can select multiple regulated unit groups to be associated to a particular applicable requirement, as we saw earlier. To create a rug, you click Manage Regulatory Documents, and from here you can click on the Manage Rugs data point. If you want to see the rugs that you have, you can search the rugs. So as you can see here, Gen 1 is going to be all of our Gen 1 engines, okay? And to do this, so let's just create a rug real quick. So let's create a rug. Let's say subpart 6C. And we'll do a date of 1901. Click Save. From here, I go to the Processes tab and I can create a process association. And I can select any of the processes that I have in APIMS. Okay, and I can select just one process or I can select multiple processes. Now, once I do this, this rug will now be available for me to associate to my permit conditions. Okay. This is a key step because this is what allows us to tie permit conditions to a particular process. Okay. So when you're breaking down your permit, it's important to think about what processes are subject to these requirements. This is also key when creating your checklist. Okay. Any questions about the navigation of the regulatory document module? It's pretty straightforward. I know it's a module that's probably not used on a daily basis. But I want to make sure we don't have any questions on this part of it, because now we're going to move into the checklist section. Okay. All right. So when doing your assessment checklists, there's a couple of things that need to be considered. One is, what is your regulatory risk? Usually with a permit, you don't want to put every little tiny thing into your checklist, because that is going to be overwhelming. So unless you have it already institutionalized as a process that you're doing, I would recommend that you keep things simple. So look at what the regulatory risk is for that particular item. What's the frequency that you have to comply with it? A lot of times permits will say you have to check your degreaser, inspect your degreasers monthly, or you have to take a manometer reading on your paint booth quarterly. So that's the frequency that you need to look at. You need to run your engines monthly. That would be kind of a thing that you need to look at. The other thing is what sources need this completed for them. And so you're going to want to group your checklists according to that. Also, who is going to be the person that's going to know the answers to these questions? Like, did the engine run that month? Chances are that's going to be somebody in the facility power shop. Who took the manometer reading? Was it the air quality manager, or was it somebody in the shop? Okay. And then total number of questions. If your checklist gets to be too large, the inclination is that it's going to be too much work and people aren't going to do it. So if you're just getting going with an inspection program at your installation, I would keep it simple. I would keep it high level, and then I would slowly start to expand upon that. So I would find the high risk things, the main sources that need to be inspected, and I would try and keep my checklist to less than 12 questions. Okay. A lot of people I find already are doing inspections, and but they're just doing them in a spreadsheet outside of APIMS. So with that, I would suggest you just formalize what you're already doing in APIMS. Some installations have shop involvement where the shops are more than willing to go in and log their inspections. Sometimes they don't, and sometimes it falls all to the air quality manager. And so in that case, it may be a checklist to make sure that you're following up and checking that these logs exist, or checking that this happens. So this isn't a one size fits all. This section by far is the most customized to the base and the program that they're running. And so there's a lot of things that you need to think about with how your installation works now, and then just formalize it. As you get people used to using APIMS and using the inspection module, then you can start to increase the roles that people have, and maybe go to shop level things. The most, let's see, I think it's been probably 5 or 6 years now. We had a big effort where we tried to do this at a lot of bases, and a lot of bases fell in love with the idea of their shops doing inspections, and then they would do oversight inspections, and it got to be just too much. And once you missed a few inspections, then the module just kind of got out of date, and the backlog got too big, and then they stopped using it altogether, which is why it's better to keep it simple to start with. Okay. I don't know if anybody on this call has been using this, or has found that, or has any tips for that, of things that they've done at their installations. No? Okay. All right. Well, let's go look at a few examples of checklists. So to go to the checklist area, we're going to go compliance checklists. And from here, it's going to show you all of the different checklists for the different media. So keep in mind, there are the storage tank checklists here. So the ones that are seen in the STAR module, they're housed here as part of the storage tank functional area. Okay. So if I was to sort on air quality, you can see that we've got monthly degreasing, monthly facility compliance, monthly outdoor surface coating. And so the naming of these is really useful. So in the name of it, and this is highly recommended, put the frequency, put the source type, and what you're checking. Now, if you were to be having the operators do it, you may want to say monthly degreasing operator checklist, semi-annual air quality manager checklist. That kind of thing can help keep things clear. There's also two different types of checklists that you can have. You can have scheduled checklists and unscheduled checklists. So scheduled checklists are something that are going to be queued up in a work basket and are going to be done on a frequent basis. Then there's things that are unscheduled. So for example, if your permit has a requirement of items that you must do when bringing on a new source, you may want to put that in a checklist and not schedule it. Okay. So let's just look at this NSPS engine compliance checklist real quick. So the way that the inspection checklists work is you've got groups. And so the groups can be anything that you want. To create a group, you can double click on groups and it'll bring a new screen up. And from here, you can create a group or you can use one of the groups that's already in here. Okay. So for this one, we have used operation and record keeping. It tells us how many questions are associated to each group. And if I wanted to add another group, I can simply click the checkbox and hit save. And then I can close this window. So now you can see I've got a new group down here. If I want the maintenance to be before the operation, I can click and drag it up and reorder my groups in that manner. Okay. Now, if I wanted to add a question to maintenance, I can double click on it, create a question. Okay, so this is just a generic question that I made up. I can select what the correct response is. Now, when doing this activity, it's highly recommended that all of your checklist questions have the same correct answer. This makes it easier when doing the inspections. I always default to yes. I try and make all my questions worded to say, yes, it did comply with this. Sometimes that gets a little awkward, but it makes it easier when you're doing inspections that you don't have to try and click different ones. You can kind of, it just makes it faster. So I'm going to say yes. Now there's another thing that's corrective action needed. I try not to use this very often. The only time I would say to use the corrective action is if the question says something like, did you exceed this emission limit? And if you did, you need to provide a report to the state within 10 days. In that case, I would say, yes, a corrective action needs to be happen. And then I would click save and finish. Okay, so now I have my question here. There's a corrective action and the correct answer is yes. So now if I expand it, I've got a new node underneath that's applicable requirements and corrective actions. So if I look at this one, you can see that it's got a green checkbox that indicates that applicable requirements have been tied to this. You do not have to have an applicable requirement for every question. Okay, so if you have things that the shop does that's a best practice that's not necessarily tied to your permit, you can still include that in the checklist. Okay. And so for this one, if you look at the applicable requirement, it's going to give me the verbiage from the regulatory document module of which permit requirement this meets. So has the engine been operated and maintained according to manufacturer instructions? And so here it says owners and operators must maintain it over the entire life of the engine. And then it says that it must comply with emission standards specified in the subpart. So you can see the specific permit requirements that are being fulfilled by answering this particular checklist question. Okay. So to associate it, once again, you double click on it, create applicable requirement association. It's then going to ask you for your regulatory document. Okay, so in this case, we're going to say subpart quad I, which isn't necessarily true, but this is a demo. And then once I specify which permit I'm looking at, I can associate the condition number. Okay. Now, one of the things that's neat about this is that I can have a single checklist or a single question that meets multiple requirements. So in this case, the NESHAP may require this. It may also be written in your permit, and it may be in the PBR. So by answering this one question, I can show that I'm fulfilling both a federal regulation, a state regulation, and my Title V, right? So you can combine all of the different permits into the applicable requirements for this one question. So your checklist doesn't have to just comply with a single permit. It can be for any type of regulatory oversight that you may have. Okay. Next, corrective actions. So this is one that I talked about with corrective actions. So let's create a corrective action. Like I said, I use this sparingly. The reason why I don't use corrective actions very often is if you have a non-compliance with this particular question, you cannot complete the inspection until you log the corrective action. So I save these things for like you must notify the state within 10 days, or you're required to fix the malfunction within 30 days. Anything that's time boxed like that, that has specific reminders, this can be a good cue that you still have an action that you need to take and that it is time boxed and on a schedule. So corrective action, report to state, deviation. Okay, and then the completion interval can be, I have 1 or I have 10 days to do that. Okay. And so when I'm doing my inspection checklist and I answer the wrong thing on this, it will then prompt me and let me know that I do have an action to take after that. Okay. And this is kind of what I'm going to talk about a little bit later with the continuity. While you may know your program, if somebody else comes into that role, this is a good way for them to come up to speed with the program already, if it's kind of giving them a checklist of what to do. You're not relying on them to go through and know and read every line of the permit. They can go through and do their inspections because they're going to be queued up. So it's kind of a to-do list. And then if they have a problem, it's going to let you know, hey, you still have other stuff that you need to do. It helps things not get missed. The other nice part about this is while your inspection program may be working, having it in APIMS means that anybody with access to APIMS can complete these functions. It kind of shares the load. It also allows if a regulator comes and asks, hey, have you been inspecting this source? You're not relying on trying to go to some shared drive or to somebody's computer. Anybody with access to APIMS can pull up the artifacts and prove that you're complying and in what way you're complying. Okay. So any questions about how to create a checklist, how to link the requirements, or how to create a corrective action? Okay. All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about is, and I kind of mentioned this, that there are two types of checklists. There are scheduled inspections, and these are associated to a specific unique process record. They're queued up and show up in your work basket based on your roles, and they display on the dashboard. Okay, so you can go to a dashboard and it'll show you how you're doing on complying with those scheduled inspections. The next one is unscheduled inspections. I talked about this before. They're good for required actions that only occur occasionally, such as new sources, or if you just want to have a reference to say, hey, you know, for all my quad I engines, what do I need to make sure that I'm doing? And then the other thing with assessment checklist is, and I touched on this already, they're searchable. So you don't have to go flip through a file drawer or some sort of file structure. You can just say, I need to know the paint booth inspection for these dates. And so it's kind of a searchable record keeping repository. And then it's available to all people with access to the installation. So for instance, Monty, as the ISS, you can see how all of your installations are doing with their inspections and if they've had any issues that need to be followed up. If somebody is out on leave and an inspector comes, somebody else can fill in pretty easily and find out how things are going, okay? So next thing I'm going to show you is how to schedule an inspection. So like I said, when you go to unique process, okay, so I'm just going to pull up a process real quick. So this is for a cold solvent process. And in the unique process record, there is the assessments tab. Under assessments, you are going to see all of the performed assessments. So actually, let me show you this real quick here. If I was to look up this process in the production database, so I have to apologize. I'm doing some of this out of a testing training database so I can alter the data. And then some of it, I want to show you how it works at a particular installation. So I'll be bouncing between the two. So if I go to assessments, you can see here that these questions have, this assessment has been completed. I can pull up an archive PDF of the checklist and the assessment that shows you how everything was answered, who completed it, what date, and then any comments that may happen, okay? So if this was something that had, 20 inspections, they would all be showed up here right in the process record, makes it easy to find and show this is how I'm making sure I comply with this particular thing. And then if there's any attachments to the assessment, you can see that here. Okay. So the first sub tab is performed assessments. And then we're going to go to assessment definitions. Okay. So right now, this one has one assessment definition. And you can see that basically what happens is you come in here and you tell it which checklist that you've created applies to this particular process. So in this case, it's the monthly degreasing cold cleaner compliance assessment. It's assigned to anybody with the APIM POC work assignment code. Okay. And that is taken care of in the point of contact record. Okay. You can create a point of contact and assign them that particular work assignment code. Okay. And then task this assessment to process contacts. Yes. So anybody that's a contact on this process will also be assigned it. And then you can give it an assessment interval. So this one is once per month. Okay. So when you're doing this in the work basket, the next inspection will stay there until it's completed. Once it's completed, then the next month will queue itself up. If it's completed on like April 2nd, it won't queue up the next inspection until May 1st. Okay. But if you didn't complete the April inspection and it's now May, that April inspection will still show up. And the May inspection won't appear until you complete the April one to even say, like, I did not inspect. Okay. And I'll show you that in a minute. And then there is a workflow route option. I don't recommend it very often to use. It's one of those things that's very nice for a mature inspection program. And it really is only necessary if you have a lot of field level people completing the assessments that may or may not need additional oversight. And so the workflow routing and condition, I don't recommend it. There's a few bases that use it, but when I'm configuring somebody's module, I don't usually use it, at least not at first. Okay, so I'll warn you against that. That can kind of be for more established programs. Okay, any questions about how to create an assessment definition? And you can have multiple checklists associated to a particular process. For example, some will have an operator checklist that answers, a few simple questions that are only available if you're looking at the equipment. And then things for like air emission compliance, then that can be on the air quality manager. So that's one of those things that I talked about where think about who would be the best person to answer that question. Excuse me, sorry, my voice is starting to get me. But yeah, any checklists that you have in here are available on this drop down. So let's see here. Let's see. So we can add one, work assignment code. I usually use the APIM POC. You can customize these and create whichever roles that you want. These are some of the canned ones, but you can assign it how you need to. And like I said, that is configurable in the point of contact table. And then you can, if it's a daily inspection, you can set that up once per day. It's anything from days, weeks, months, years. Okay. So like for boiler tune-ups, if you have, every 3 years, you need to do a boiler tune-up, you can set a checklist for that and say every 3 years, I need to have this compliance monitored. And then it'll prompt you in your work basket. Hey, it's been 3 years since you did this. It's time for you to do it. Okay. Any questions about how to do this? Oh, one other thing that I want to talk about is if you have a general facility checklist that you want tasked and you want it to show up in your work basket, but you don't necessarily have a specific process that it needs to be tied to. A lot of places will create an administrative process, okay? And so with that administrative process, I'm trying to think if they have that here at Lackland. But a lot of times they will create just an administrative that says compliance inspections. And it will be local process name compliance inspections, and you'll task it to that particular process, okay? So that's one way to do it. There will be some upcoming changes to the compliance module that will allow you to schedule things a little bit more flexibly. But for right now, it is tied to the process. So if you have an issue with how to do this or the smartest way to do it, please feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to kind of advise you on some of the lessons learned that I've had in setting this up. Okay, so that is kind of how you set up an inspection and how you schedule it. The next thing I want to show you is the actual compliance assessments. Okay, so we've broke down our regulatory document. We've created our checklists, we've scheduled them to a process, and now it's time for us to complete our inspections. Okay, so this is the compliance assessment module. So for all of my queued up and scheduled inspections, I can click on the record scheduled assessment results. And actually, sorry, I want to do this in this database. So record scheduled assessment results. From here, I can search based on lots of different criteria. I can say I only want to see the ones that are assigned to me. So if I'm an operator, that I probably want that checklist checked. In this particular database, my user is not associated to any, so I'm just going to uncheck that and search. And from here, this is basically my to-do list. Now, if there's multiple people that are doing the same types of inspections, it's a first come, first serve. If I complete this particular inspection for this source, it'll disappear from everybody's work basket. So it eliminates the duplication of work or the possibility of that. So when I'm ready to do it, so you've got your assessment period. So this particular one is from March. So let's go click on it. And if I want to take the paper view out to the source with me, I can click the print view. And it will provide me with, well, maybe I thought it would. Apparently that's not working. Let's go here. So if I hit print view. Okay, normally it would give you a full checklist report to show you what questions are on there, and you can take it out to the field with you. Okay, so if you have somebody that doesn't have computer access, they can click on that and do that. Now, if I want to hit record, I can come in here and say the date that I performed it, or I can select not performed. Okay, so this particular one, I do not want to do it. So let's go here. So like I said, this one was done in March. So I'm going to say that I did do it on the 12th. I'm going to pick the name of the person that did the inspection. And I'm going to click save. Once I do that, the question tab will populate with all of the questions from my checklist. Okay. Now, if there are no findings, I can click the no findings button and it'll default all of the answers to what the correct answer is. Now, if there's a corrective action required and I say no, so it highlights it in red, it would make sure that I couldn't finish this inspection without recording a corrective action. Okay, and this is where I would create my corrective action and say notified state. So the corrective action would be to notify the state, and then I can say I notified it, and I can say the date that I completed that corrective action. Okay. So back to this. So you can say no findings. If there are findings, it will highlight it in red so that you know that there are findings. Okay. And then I can save and complete the assessment. Now, when I go to complete the assessment, it's going to give me a summary of the finding status. I can view the report. And it'll show me that report that we saw in the process record of all of the things that have been completed, right? So, oh, sorry. It's not going to let me close that window. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to get this to where I can close it. All right. So now, so now I have completed the assessment, accept and complete. And once that happens, then it is going to schedule up the next assessment, right? And allow me to do the next month's. So I completed the March assessment. So now the next one automatically queued up. Okay. And so I can just work through my work basket in that manner. Okay. So those are how you do a scheduled assessment. You also have the option to record a one-time assessment. And in this case, you can say what process you want to say that you were inspecting. So we can search up a process. We can select the checklist name that we wanted to inspect. And then the date that we performed it. And then once that's done, it will queue up the questions and allow you to record that inspection, same as on the previous screens. Okay. So that's record one time. There's also search completed assessments. So this is the file cabinet I was telling you about. I can look up any checklist name. Like, let's say I want to look at the cold cleaning inspections that I did between November 2023 and May of 2024. I can even search things that have at least one finding to find out if I've had any problems. And there we go. And from here, I can print view and it pulls up that report that we've seen with all of the inspection findings and compliance. Okay. Any questions about how to use the compliance assessment module to record an inspection?
Julie, this is Nadine over at Edwards. I have a
Yes.
question.
Mhm.
So our checklist, we have to enter a lot of information every month. Well, every time that we do those,
Mhm.
like the serial numbers, and it's repetitive. Is there an easy way to copy it from the previous inspection, that type of information, other than, I mean, right now we just open up a file, cut and paste that over. Um, but
I would say that if you're asking something like, I would say that you need to alter the way your checklists are phrased. There's
okay.
probably an easier way to ask that question without having to copy and paste all the serial numbers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess that's something that I can talk to you and Dave about
Yeah, I think
offline.
that you could do that possibly with a report. And I'll talk about the reports here a little bit. I think that's just more of the way you've configured it, there might be a more efficient way to get to the same solution. And
Okay.
like I said, this is 100% configurable. Whenever I help people out with getting this program up to date, the first question I ask is, how are you running your program? Because every single one of these is custom fit to your installation, how you do business, the type of personnel that you have at your installation, the resources that you have, and what kind of oversight do you have? I've done things where, I have a base in, the Eastern US that their programs run pretty smoothly. So they have a semi-annual report and an annual report that they have to fulfill. So their checklists are basically a checklist to help them make sure that all of the stuff leading up to doing the semi-annual report is done. So they have 2 checklists a year that, or 2 inspections a year that they do, and it's very high level. But that's all that program needs to maintain compliance. Whereas I have a base in California in a pretty stringent regulatory area that, these particular shops have their own checklists, and then the air quality manager has a checklist to make sure of that. And so they've got everything from monthly shop level inspections to the air quality oversight inspections for all of these different sources. So it's really what works best at your installation without putting extra burden on your installation. Does that make sense? We don't want to configure this module so that it becomes a chore to do. We want to configure this module so that it's a tool to help you do the things that you're already doing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
Thank
if
you.
you're in situation where you don't feel like you're getting value out of doing this and you're just going through the motions, it's not configured correctly and there's a better way to do it. And in that case, you need to reach out and let us help you get it in a way that it works. It's supposed to be a tool. It's not supposed to be a chore. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Now the next thing is, so you've got all of these scheduled inspections. I did want to show you this real quick. If you go to the air home, and this is, keep in mind, this is a training database, so I'm not sure about the dashboard. I may have to switch over, but there is a compliance assessment dashboard. That allows you to look and see how you're doing on inspections. This is a bad example. Let me go to production, because I know that Lackland is doing much better than what the red showed. So thank you to Lackland for letting me use you as an example of data, because I do know that they've been doing a lot of their inspections. So if I go to dashboard compliance assessment, you can see here for the year where they're at. They're 50% compliant right now. You can see how many past due inspections you have, complete with findings. I'll stick up for Lackland. They have these, they just haven't been entered in because a lot of times the compliance inspection checklists are given to the shop level people who may or may not have access in APIMS. So I think there's a little bit of a data lag here. But you can come look at the actual scheduled inspections. Oops, sorry, I misclicked on that one. But you can see all of the inspections and how they're doing. You can search on it and you can download the inspection report. Okay, so there is tracking here. So if you do have shop level people, you can come quickly and see how they're doing to comply with the various things. And then these graphs are, you can export it to Excel and so on and so forth. Okay. All right. Any questions about the front end module or anything with how to configure the module and use it?
Hey, Julie, I'd just like to point out that one of the themes with the APIMS team this year is a major revamp on the compliance assessment modules. So
Yes.
the look and feel is going to change significantly. Hopefully it's going to be a little bit more intuitive to the users. But that is something that should be completed by the end of this calendar year. Over.
Yeah. No, and that's a good point. And like I said, right now, you can schedule it inspections to a process. I'm told that the reconfig, you will be able to schedule it to a group of processes, a shop, a piece of equipment in any other kind of entity. So you should have a little bit more flexibility. But with that being said, I wouldn't use that as a reason to not start setting this up now. Does that make sense? Because like I said, people have been getting dinged in their audits. And if you start doing it now, you'll just be better off later.
Yeah, any work you do now will be transferred over with the upgrades. So
yes. Okay, now we get to my favorite part and the biggest reason why you should do this is reports. All of that data is in there now. And while it may have taken a while to get your permit in there, it's well worth it. And I'm about to show you why. So in the quality control folder under air quality in business objects, there are some canned reports that are available to everybody. One is called permit requirements by process and rug. Another one is called regulatory document and checklist. And then there's your inspection checklist summary. And then several installations also have installation specific usage and emission limit stoplight reports. And this is where you get the value in having this data configured and having it queryable. Okay. You basically have a stoplight of where you're at with it. And all you have to do to get these is have the reports there, run them, and make sure that you're tracking your usage and calculating your emissions. Okay. So with that being said, I wanted to put the names of them in the slides just so that you would have them. But we're going to dive into business objects and I'm going to show you some of these reports. Let me make sure I'm in production. Okay, so if I come to the home menu and I go to folders. Oh, sorry, it timed out while I was teaching. Okay, so if I go to report, custom, and then I click on folders. I want to go to public folders, public APIMS reports, PMO reports, and then under air quality in the quality control folder, there are all of these reports. Now, if you have these reports that you like, once again, you can favorite them so they show up on your menu. To favorite them, you click the ellipses and you can say mark as favorite. Okay, and then it will show up on your homepage. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So the first report that we'll talk about is permit requirements by process and rug. Okay, to run it, you just click on it. Now, because this is a report that's available to everybody, when you first come into it, the data that you see may not be for your installation. Okay, so as you can see right now, I am in Lackland, but this is Seymour Johnson's data. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is click the refresh button. And then it's going to let me select the permits that I want. So if I want to just look at one permit, I can. If I want to look at all my permits, I can. So I'm just going to click the X here to clear out the criteria, and I'm going to refresh it. Now, once again, Lackland has all of the PBRs, the Title V, and then they actually have their Quad I broken down and put into their database. So I'm going to check everything just because that's the most fun kind of thing to do, right? Then I'm going to click run. And I can see that for emission unit ID 624, 125 kilowatt emergency generator, these are all of the permit requirements that I have to comply with in this table right here. Okay. Up at the top, there are filters. So right now, this is only showing emission limits. So if I want to say all, it's going to increase the number of requirements that I see, right? I can also filter it to just a particular process. And it'll alter the results down here. What I find really useful is, let's say that I am new to my program, but I need to know what reports I need to submit. I can come here and I can say, I want to know all of my reporting requirements. And I can click OK. And then it will only filter down to all of the reporting requirements and let me know which processes have those reporting requirements. Okay. Or if I want to know requirements by rugs. So this one is for boilers and heaters, degreasing units. These are all my degreasing unit requirements. Okay. And as you can see, it's got a lot of the PBR requirements in them. Any questions about this? It's a pretty simple report, but it's a very valuable, powerful report. And once again, you can export it to Excel by clicking the export button. You can do both reports or just a single report. Now, if you have a filter enforced on the report, it will only export what you've got it filtered to show. Okay. This is also really good if you're new to your program and you have this data in APIMS for you to come up to speed with your permit quickly. Okay. So that's the first report I wanted to show you. The next report is in the same folder. And it is regulatory document and checklist. So for those of you that maybe haven't used the module, you're not up to speed with what you've got in there, you can click regulatory document and checklist. Once again, you're going to want to hit refresh. And let's say that which reg doc do I want? I want 433. So this one, let's say that I only want to look at my paint booth PBR. These are all of the requirements. So this is what I've got in APIMS in a spreadsheet format. So it's basically taking everything from here, this area, and putting it in a spreadsheet format for me. Okay. Then it's going to tell me any checklists that have requirements from this, or any checklist that I have in APIMS. So these are all the checklists and the applicable requirements. So this is just a summary report of everything that I have in this module. Okay, so I don't have to keep clicking into all of it. This is just a one-stop shop to look at what I have. So you can review your questions and see if they're up to date with the most current permit. And then your regulated unit group, instead of having to go into each one of those, you can say, okay, these are my Gen 1 engines. These are my Gen 2 engines. So as you do permit renewals or things like that, you can tell how you have things associated and make sure that your list is up to date. Okay. The next report is the inspection checklist summary. So this one And it's a big report, so I may not refresh it. We'll just go with the data that's in here. So inspection taskings. So this is going to tell you every checklist and which processes it's associated with. So that assessment tab that we went and we scheduled assessments to, this one's going to tell you which processes have inspections tasked to them. So this saves you from having to go into each process and look and see what it is. So this is a summary of where your program is at right now. So 719 has a monthly environmental management checklist that's tasked to these people, the annual tanks inspection, and so on and so forth. The next tab is going to be your checklist. So this is just a copy of what your checklist says and the applicable requirement. Inspection results is going to show you a summary of all of the different inspections that have completed, what their findings were, what the answers to the questions were. And then if you scroll down far enough, scroll over, at the end of every checklist name and process, it's going to tell you the most recent instance of this particular inspection being completed. So if you want to know how up to date am I with my inspection program, this report will kind of show you. So you can see some of these particular ones are out of date, right? But the data here is for an installation that is in the process of rebaselining their program, okay? Work assignments, we talked about tasking things to APIM POC and the point of contact. So this gives you a summary of all of the people at your installation and the particular roles that they have. So then you can tell who is actually getting these inspections in their work basket. Do I need to update this? And it saves you a little bit of time in the front end. And then this is all of the process contacts. So if you have there was a radio button when you scheduled it. Did you want to assign this to the process contacts? This is giving you a summary of who the process contacts are. Okay. So once again, this tells you which processes have which inspections tasked to them, what the checklists say, what the results of the inspections are, what people have this work assignment, and what people have this particular process as a contact. Okay. So this report is just kind of a holistic view of all the various screens in the front end to help you troubleshoot if you are up to date on your data, if there's any data that needs to be rebaselined. And it's just kind of a one-stop shop for the data quality. Okay. Any questions about these canned reports before I move into the installation specific reports? Okay. I'm going to pick on Lackland again because they have a really nice report. So Lackland has gone through and I'm not sure if they wrote it or if they solicited help in writing it. But if you're not comfortable in business objects, there are people that are comfortable enough to build these types of reports. Okay. So the important thing is to know that these reports are out there. Okay. So if I go to, I believe Lackland, they have this Lackland compliance analysis report. So I'm going to open this up. And what this did is it's got a lot of different compliance analysis. So this particular thing that we're looking at right here is going to show you that these are the actual emissions. So you can update this report for whatever time frame you've calculated for, and it'll show you what your annual emissions are, and then it'll include a permit limit. You can also stoplight this report so that it'll show you red if you're not compliant. It'll show you orange if you're approaching your limits. So one of the things that I see that's a common thing is you've got a permit with a ton of emission limits for different sources. So in the checklist, one of the mistakes that people make is they say, was source XYZ greater than or less than 50 tons per year of CO? And they'll have like 50 different questions according to their emission results. The way I like to set it up is according to Lackland compliance analysis report, were all sources below specified emission limits. And then what happens is you are then prompted to come in, you hit refresh on this report, You do a quick check, you make sure that you're below all the limits, and then you can answer your inspection question. You can even, if you want to, export this report as an Excel file or as a snapshot and attach it to the inspection to prove, yes, I calculated it all and I'm below the limits. Okay. So this is one example of, it's got emissions, it's got usage. You can do 12-month rolling total usage checks, things like that. Another thing that you can do in business objects is if you have specific reports that need to go to the state in a certain format. Let me see if I can find it. You can have these canned reports developed. This is a report that they have to submit every year. Instead of reformatting it every single time, they can hit refresh. It'll add in the new numbers. They export it and submit it. Okay. So if you have things that need to be submitted on a repetitive basis, you have tables that need to go into your emissions submittal, Monty, like the Colorado TAC report, the reporting layer can be very useful in automating a lot of that type of thing. So you're not hand typing, you're not creating extra opportunity for error, and you're efficiently managing your program to let the database do the work for you. There's no reason you need to go into your emission calculation tab, click on that particular process and review all the different pollutants that have limits when you can come in here, click refresh on a report and have it in a dashboard that says, okay, for this material, I'm below the limits. It's all right here. For this particular AECOM, I'm below the hours of operation. For the emissions, I'm below the annual emission total. Okay. So make it easier, make it quicker. And I highly recommend that you use the reporting layer. Now, like I said, all of that data configuration we went through in the front end is going to make things easier on the back end. So the initial data does take some time, but it's well worth it on a monthly basis to make sure you're complying with everything that you need. Okay. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about is continuity. While many of you may have been in your role at your base for a long time and you know your permit inside and out, and you know how all the things that you need to do to comply with, if you ever were to leave that job or you were out on extended leave, it's going to make it really hard for the next person to come in. If you have all of this configured and all of these reports set up, it makes it a lot easier for the next person to get up to speed, and it minimizes the risk to the Air Force when it comes to compliance if there is some sort of continuity plan. And so APIMS can serve as that to-do list. If you know what inspections you need to do and what frequency, it's going to shorten the learning curve for the next person. Okay. All right, that is all I had on this module. I knew I wouldn't go the whole time, but I like to allow 2 hours for questions. So I appreciate everyone's time. I'm going to stop the recording now and allow for questions.